A young boy, no older than 12, once knelt in the dust of Nazareth with a handful of clay in his hands. He was shaping it into a bird. The other children his age were laughing at the absurdity of his prank and the serious look on his face until something impossible happened right before their eyes. With a breath of air, the clay began to move, wings stretched out, feathers began to harden, and then suddenly the bird took flight. 18 years later, the boy showed up at the bank of the Jordan River, demanding that John the Baptist dip him inside the water, and shortly after, he sped off to the wilderness. Now that's not a Bible story you can recognize. At least that's not how it's told. But the first part of that story comes from a forgotten text known as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, written almost 2,000 years ago. The text claims that even as a child, Jesus had the power to create life itself. If this story is true, and if the boy who made clay birds fly was the same man who made Lazarus rise, then it leaves us with one very disturbing question. What happened during those missing years of his life? That little experiment of making clay birds fly is a sweet miracle, until the story turned darker somewhere. The same text says the little boy later struck a boy dead for bumping into him, then raised him back to life. Another one shows him blinding a neighbor who questioned his power. But let's stop there for now, because the story gets darker and darker the more pages we turn. If historians have confirmed that the Infancy Gospel really existed during the canonization of other Gospel books, why was the text excluded from the Bible as we see it today? Why did the Roman Church silence this story and several others? Now, the answer is much more complicated than the questions, and you'd never guess it correctly. You see, by the 2nd and 3rd centuries, church fathers like Irenaeus and Origen had read several writings, including the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Their verdict was that these books were dangerous and heretical. Yeah, talk about placing a restriction on knowledge after you've acquired it. But stay with me, it gets crazier than that. These men insisted that Jesus must have been perfect from the start. He was sinless, blameless, and incapable of cruelty. So the story of that boy who killed out of anger did not fit the image they wanted generations of Christians to see. Before we get to the other reasons why these two religious despots banned the Infancy Gospel, because trust me, they are many and ugly, here's what happened to the texts. I know you probably think these texts were thrown into a massive secret furnace behind the papal office and set ablaze. But no, what the Romans did to them actually baffles me till date. The texts were set aside, shelved, and condemned but not burnt, which makes me wonder, what were they going to do next? We'll get to that shortly. The official canons such as Matthew, Mark, Luke, John would tell only the parts of Jesus' story that fits a clean picture. The rest would vanish into the darkness of forbidden gospels. So we ask if the early church could choose what to keep. Doesn't that mean an entire dimension of Jesus' life has been deliberately erased? The Bible goes completely dark after the temple experience, where a 12-year-old Jesus was seen debating with teachers in Jerusalem. And let's not even get into how shocking that sight must have been to his parents. The next time we would meet the boy, he's already a man, standing at the Jordan, ready for baptism. It seemed like someone had intentionally ripped away entire chapters from his life. And that's not just us being dramatic. Historians have noticed it too, especially in Luke's Gospel, which presents the clearest example of a deliberate omission. Instead of giving details, Luke casually writes that Jesus was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. About 30. That little word tells us something big. Luke wasn't writing a full biography. He wasn't interested in birthdays, resumes, or daily habits. He was crafting a story with a mission, choosing not to fill in every year. That omission is more than a gap. It looks more like a locked door. And every apocryphal story knocking on it makes us wonder what lies behind. The more people probe into the long gaps in Jesus' life, the more theories start flying everywhere. Some of them sound reasonable, others sound like adventure novels. But all of them are trying to answer one and the same question. Where was he between ages 12 and 30? The most common answer people have tried to come up with is that maybe he trained with the Essenes, a strict Jewish desert living group. More on them later. Maybe he studied in Egyptian mystery schools, learning secret wisdom. Maybe he traveled all the way to India or even Kashmir, absorbing Eastern philosophy. Or perhaps the simplest option, He just stayed home, working as a carpenter, waiting for the right moment. Now let's slow down and test each of these ideas one after the other. Some people say that during those silent years, Jesus didn't just stay in Nazareth. He might have gone out searching for wisdom to learn, to grow and prepare for what was coming. One of the oldest sayings point to a strange little group called the Essenes. They lived out in the desert near the Dead Sea, far from the noise of the cities. Their homes were carved into the dry hills, and their days were filled with quiet prayers and handwritten scrolls. They dressed in white, ate little, and spent their lives waiting for God's kingdom to come. Some of their writings sound a lot like Jesus' teachings about turning away from greed, about purity of heart, about loving truth more than comfort. So people began to wonder, did Jesus ever meet them? Did he maybe spend time among them, listening, learning, taking in their simple, holy way of life? No one can say for sure. There are no records or proof, so I won't start making up scenarios in your head. But still, you can almost imagine it, can't you? A young man walking through the desert at dusk, stopping by their campfire, and asking questions that would one day shake the world. Then there's another story of Jesus' missing years told much farther away. It began in the 1800s when a Russian traveler said he had found old scrolls in a monastery in Tibet. They spoke of a teacher from Israel, a man called Saint Isa, who studied with wise men in India. For years, people were amazed at the possibility that maybe Jesus also traveled east. Maybe he sat under the same trees as the Buddha, learning about peace and compassion. It's a beautiful thought, but most historians say it probably never happened. Still, it's easy to see why people believed it. We want Jesus to feel bigger than history, to stretch across the world, connecting east and west. And maybe that longing says something about us more than about him. But here's the strange part that will beat your imagination. There was an early Christian story about the apostle Thomas traveling to India after Jesus' death. So when people imagined Jesus going east before his ministry, it didn't sound crazy. If his followers could go that far, why couldn't the teacher himself? The hard truth to admit is we may never know if any of this really happened. Maybe he stayed home, working as a carpenter in Nazareth. Maybe he wandered. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. But here's the question that keeps us hooked. If even one scrap of these rumors was true, how would it change the Jesus we think we know today? What if Jesus really did spend those hidden years learning from strangers, gathering wisdom the world wasn't ready for yet? Kindly share your thoughts below, and please subscribe as we continue. Centuries later, men in robes would sit by candlelight, arguing over which of these stories were safe to keep and which were too dangerous to survive. Now here's the part that might make you blink. Because believe it or not, these men didn't want to burn the strange stories about Jesus. Instead of throwing away the odd books, they read and made notes about them without exactly saying they were holy scripture or calling them lies. By the 4th century, something else raised the stakes higher: power. Unity became urgent when Constantine converted and Christianity began working closely with the Roman Empire. Ever heard of the guy Constantine? He was terrific. Comment below if you'd like us to make a video about him. The simple truth is, when power and doctrine mix, ridiculously strange stories are the first to go, such as a boy Jesus striking down playmates or a wandering Jesus in India. These supposed bits of his life were termed too risky to circulate. So what do we make of that? Did the church protect people from confusion, or did it hide a more human side of Jesus that didn't fit their perfect story? If you look at the forgotten writings, it's clear. The missing years of Jesus were never really silent at all. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, for example, didn't stay in one village. It spread fast and was translated into Greek, Syriac, Latin, crossing deserts and oceans. And far away, in Arabic and Syriac lands, people added their own touches, such as Jesus speaking from the cradle, Jesus calming wild animals. Each region tried to shape the child Messiah in its own cultural lens. But not all of these traditions are friendly. For instance, the Toledat Yeshu, a hostile Jewish counter-story, completely flips Jesus' miracles into sorcery. To his opponents, the clay bird wasn't divine power, it was dangerous magic. Now imagine an old woman in a Syrian village sitting by the fire, retelling the story of the clay birds to her grandchildren. That's how these stories spread, through faults in our memory. So which memory holds the truth? Was Jesus the playful child of miracles, or the dangerous boy the church tried to forget? When you read the four Gospels, you notice something. Jesus kind of shows up already perfect. He doesn't argue, he doesn't make mistakes, he always knows exactly what to say. It's like watching a movie where the main character never stumbles. It feels a little distant. Now compare that with the Jesus we find in the forgotten Gospels. There, we meet Jesus, who gets angry as a child. He scares people with his power. He even seems confused at times. Honestly, that version feels closer to the way real life works. Because in real life, people mess up, say the wrong thing, and get emotional. And maybe that's why these missing years mattered so much to people back then. Nobody could understand how a carpenter one day just walked out of Nazareth and started healing the blind. So they filled the gap with stories, some sweet, some scary, because that's what we do best. We don't like holes in the story, so we patch them up. But it does leave us wondering, did the early church smooth out all the rough edges on purpose? Did they want us to see a safe, miracle-working Jesus instead of a boy who sometimes got it wrong? Here's the hard truth. We'll probably never know what Jesus really did between the ages of 12 and 30. The Gospels skip it entirely for a reason. The church fathers didn't trust the other stories, and historians today still argue about every scrap we find. History doesn't give us a neat picture, it gives us fragments. That's why this mystery is so disturbing. Every time a new fragment appears, history tilts a little. The Jesus we thought we knew looks different. So maybe the real mystery isn't just what Jesus did during those missing years. Maybe the bigger mystery is why we've let a handful of bishops decide which memories of him were worth keeping and which ones we should never read at all. So let's circle back to the question, how would it affect your faith in God if a scrap of all these theories was true? Drop your thoughts below, and if you like this video, you might want to click the next one on your screen now.